March 1942. Sam Walton is 23 years old and working the floor of a JCPenney store in Des Moines, Iowa for $75 a month. He is good at it, genuinely good. He remembers customers' names. He remembers what they bought last time. He watches how they move through the store, which displays stop them, which ones they walk past, which products they pick up and put back. He is doing something nobody has asked him to do and nobody is paying him extra for. He is studying. 50 years later, that habit, that obsessive, relentless, almost predatory habit of watching how retail works and then copying everything that works, has produced the largest company on earth, 15,000 stores in 27 countries, 2.3 million employees worldwide, revenue that in some years exceeds the GDP of countries, a family fortune of over $200 billion, and a trail of 4,000 small American towns where the hardware store closed, and the clothing shop closed, and the pharmacy closed, and the diner eventually closed. And what's left is a parking lot and a big blue box, and a community that still technically exists but has lost the thing that made it a community. The man who built all of this stole most of his ideas. Openly, happily, he walked into competitors' stores with a notepad and wrote down everything they were doing right, and went home and copied it. He drove a pickup truck until the day he died. He paid his workers wages that kept them just above the poverty line, while accumulating wealth that put him repeatedly at the top of the Forbes list of richest Americans. He received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in a wheelchair 3 weeks before he died of bone cancer. And he is still, right now, considered one of the greatest Americans of the 20th century. Newport, Arkansas, in 1945, was a town of about 7,000 people sitting on the White River in the northeast corner of the state. Cotton country, railroad town. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and the social fabric was tight enough that a newcomer buying a local business was noticed and evaluated immediately. The Ben Franklin franchise Sam Walton bought was on Front Street in downtown Newport, and it was, by the metrics that mattered, underperforming. The previous owner had let the operation get sloppy. Sales were mediocre. Inventory management was poor. The store had potential. Ben Franklin franchises were established, well supplied, with a proven format, but it wasn't close to reaching it. Walton went to work. He extended the store hours. He started selling products on the sidewalk outside, a technique he had seen work elsewhere and imported immediately. He negotiated directly with suppliers when the standard franchise supply chain was too expensive, finding cheaper sources for identical products and pocketing the margin difference. He drove to the Ben Franklin headquarters in Chicago to learn everything about their operations that wasn't in the franchise manual. He also started doing something that would define his entire career, visiting other stores. Not just Ben Franklin franchises, every retail operation within driving distance of Newport. Variety stores, dry goods stores, early self-service grocery operations. He walked in with a notepad, sometimes openly, sometimes less so, and observed. How were the products displayed? How were prices marked? How did the checkout flow work? What were customers spending the most time looking at? What were they picking up and putting back down? He was reverse engineering the retail experience from the customer's perspective, systematically before customer experience was a business school concept. Within 3 years, the Newport Ben Franklin was the most profitable Ben Franklin franchise in the 6-state region. Sales had increased from $72,000 annually when he bought it to $250,000. The store was generating $40,000 a year in profit. Newport noticed. Other merchants noticed. The landlord of the building, a man named P.K. Holmes, definitely noticed. Holmes had a son who wanted to get into retail, and when Walton's 5-year lease came up for renewal in 1950, Holmes refused to renew it. The lease had no renewal option, a detail Walton later said was the biggest business mistake of his life, and one he never made again. Holmes took the store, handed it to his son, and left Walton with the inventory, the goodwill he'd built, and absolutely nothing else. Walton was 32 years old. He had spent 5 years building something genuinely successful and had it taken from him by a technicality. He had to leave Newport entirely. The Holmes family now owned the best retail location in town. He later wrote that it was the lowest point of his professional life, that he drove around for days, genuinely not knowing what came next. What came next was Bentonville. He found a store in Bentonville, Arkansas, an even smaller town, population 3,000, tucked into the northwest corner of the state in the Ozark Mountains. He signed a lease. This time he added a renewal option. He also negotiated a clause that would let him eventually own the building. The Bentonville store was, at first glance, a step backward. Newport had been 7,000 people. Bentonville was 3,000. The location was less central, less trafficked, less commercially promising by any conventional analysis. But Walton had thought about this. He had watched what happened in Newport when Holmes took his store. And he had concluded something that would become the strategic foundation of everything he built. In small towns, the person who controlled the real estate controlled the market. In a town of 3,000, there was room for exactly one dominant general merchandise retailer. If you were that retailer, if you owned or controlled your space and you competed on price, you were essentially a local monopoly. The conventional retail wisdom of the early 1950s was that you needed population density to support a profitable store. You needed a town of at least 10,000 people to sustain a decent variety store. You needed foot traffic, which meant urban or suburban locations. Walton thought the conventional wisdom was wrong. He thought the underserved market wasn't urban. It was rural, small towns across the American South and Midwest where people had money, farming communities, blue-collar towns, places with steady employment, but no convenient access to the kind of variety and pricing that city shoppers took for granted. People in those towns were driving 30 or 40 miles to shop in larger cities. If you opened in their town, with low prices and decent selection, they would come. He spent the 1950s testing this theory across a string of Ben Franklin franchises in small Arkansas towns: Fayetteville, Ruskin Heights, Midwest City. Each store he opened reinforced the same conclusion. Small-town America was an untapped retail market of enormous scale, and nobody was serving it seriously. By 1960, he and his brother Bud operated 9 Ben Franklin stores across Arkansas and Missouri. They were profitable. But Walton was increasingly frustrated with the franchise model. Ben Franklin took a cut of everything. They dictated pricing, supply chains, and store formats, and they were not interested in the strategy Walton was developing, the deep discount approach, the extreme low-price positioning that he believed was the key to unlocking the rural market at a much larger scale. He went to the Ben Franklin headquarters and proposed that the company create a new discount format for small towns, a Ben Franklin branded store that competed on price even more aggressively, serving markets too small for the big discount chains that were emerging in the early 1960s. Ben Franklin said no, so Sam Walton built it himself. Before we get to the first Walmart, we need to spend some time on something that Sam Walton was unusually honest about in his autobiography and in interviews, which is how much of his business model he directly copied from other people. Not inspired by, not influenced by, copied. He was so open about this that it almost reads as bragging. He described visiting competitor stores as one of his primary business activities. He talked about specific things he had seen at specific competitors and then immediately implemented in his own stores. He once said, with what seems like genuine pride, that most of his best ideas were not his. They were other people's ideas that he simply executed better. Let's go through the actual record. The self-service retail concept, the idea that customers could walk through a store themselves, select their own products, and bring them to a checkout counter rather than asking a clerk to retrieve everything, came from Clarence Saunders, who opened the first Piggly Wiggly in Memphis in 1916. By the time Walton was operating his Ben Franklin stores in the 1950s, self-service was standard in grocery but still unusual in variety retail. Walton adopted it immediately and completely. The discount retail model, the idea of operating on extremely thin margins, using volume to compensate, and making the low price itself the primary marketing message, was developed in the late 1950s and early 1960s by a cluster of retailers, most significantly Kmart, which was owned by the S.S. Kresge Company, and Two Guys, and Caldor, and Ann and Hope in New England. Walton visited all of them. There is a specific documented story about Ann and Hope, a discount retailer in Cumberland, Rhode Island, that is credited by retail historians as one of the first true discount stores in America. Walton drove to Rhode Island in the late 1950s specifically to study the operation. He walked the store for hours. He took notes. He talked to the manager. He went home and wrote down everything he had seen. He did the same thing at early Kmart locations, at Two Guys, at Caldo. Every significant discount retailer operating in America in the late 1950s and early 1960s got a visit from a short man in a pickup truck from Arkansas with a notepad who asked a lot of questions. He also visited Sol Price's FedMart stores in California. Price was the retail genius who would later invent the warehouse club model with Price Club, which became Costco. Walton visited FedMart multiple times. He took notes. He later said Sol Price was the retailer he admired most in America. Years later, when Walton launched his own warehouse club format, Sam's Club, opened in 1983, he named it after himself but acknowledged privately that the concept was Price's. When directly asked in his autobiography whether he had copied his competitors, Walton's answer was essentially, "Yes, and I'm not sorry about it." Here's his actual logic, and it's worth understanding because it's more sophisticated than simple imitation. Walton believed that good retail ideas were not proprietary. They were observable facts about how customers behaved and what they wanted. The self-service layout worked not because any one retailer invented it, but because customers genuinely preferred selecting their own products. The discount model worked not because of any specific business insight, but because customers responded to low prices in predictable and powerful ways. If an idea worked, it worked because it was true, and if it was true, anyone could use it. What he added to the borrowed ideas, and this is the part that transformed copying into dominance, was operational obsession. He didn't just adopt self-service layouts. He spent years refining exactly how products should be positioned within them. He didn't just adopt the discount model. He built a logistics and distribution infrastructure that let him undercut competitors on price by margins they couldn't match. The notepad visits to competitors were gathering intelligence. The real work was what happened back in Bentonville after the visits. He was also an obsessive reader of retail trade publications. Every industry journal, every trade conference paper, every published analysis of retail trends. Walton consumed all of it. He attended industry conferences not to network, but to find people who knew something he didn't, extract it from them over lunch, and bring it home. One specific competitive intelligence operation stands out. In 1967, Walmart was still a small regional chain, 17 stores, all in Arkansas. Kmart had hundreds. Walton drove to a Kmart in a neighboring state, walked in, and spent most of a day studying the checkout system, specifically the way Kmart's registers handled transaction volume during peak hours. He had a checkout bottleneck problem in his stores, and he wanted to see how Kmart had solved it. He then drove to a second Kmart location, and a third. His store managers reported that Walton expected them to do the same thing. He didn't want managers who sat in the office reviewing spreadsheets. He wanted managers who were in the field, in competitors' stores, watching what was working. The result of all this systematic intelligence gathering was a retail operating manual that didn't exist in any written form. It existed in the collective heads of Walton and his senior team, continuously updated by observation. Impossibly hard for competitors to copy back because it wasn't written down anywhere. But the most important thing Walton copied, the thing that actually built the empire, wasn't a store layout or a checkout system. It was the idea of where to locate. Kmart's strategy was suburban. They built in or near major population centers, cities with populations over 50,000, suburban rings around larger metros. This was the conventional retail wisdom. You needed density to support a large format store. Walton watched this strategy and concluded it had a massive blind spot. There were hundreds of American towns with populations between 5,000 and 25,000. Towns too small for Kmart to bother with, too far from major metros for residents to easily shop elsewhere. These towns had real purchasing power. They had nowhere to spend it conveniently. What have you built in those towns? What if you owned the only discount store within 30 miles? What if your competitive set wasn't Kmart because Kmart wasn't there, but the local hardware store and the local five and dime that couldn't begin to match your prices? That's not a retail strategy. That's a monopoly strategy. And it is exactly what Sam Walton built. On July 2nd, 1962, Sam Walton opened Walmart Discount City in Rogers, Arkansas. Rogers had a population of about 5,400 people, The store occupied a converted building on a commercial strip at the edge of town. The signage was hand-lettered. The floor was concrete. The lighting was adequate, but not impressive. It looked, by any objective standard, like a fairly ordinary discount store in a fairly ordinary small town. Three things set it apart from everything else operating in American retail in 1962. The first was price. Walton had spent years calculating exactly how low he could price products while still running a viable business. His formula was simple and ruthless. Buy in the largest possible volume, accept the smallest possible margin, charge the customer less than any alternative they had within driving distance. At the Rogers store, this translated to prices that were genuinely shocking to customers who had been paying variety store markups their entire lives. Products that cost $1 at the local 5 and dime cost 70 cents at Walmart. Basic household items, clothing, hardware, the gap between Walmart prices and local competitor prices was consistent and significant across the entire store. The second differentiator was selection. This is something that often gets overlooked in the Walmart narrative, which tends to focus on price. But the first Walmart was also offering a range of products that no single local retailer in Rogers, Arkansas could match. Hardware and clothing and housewares and toys and health products and automotive supplies, all under one roof, all at discount prices. The convenience value alone was significant. But the price advantage on top of the convenience was what made it genuinely irresistible. The third was Walton himself. He was in that store constantly, not reviewing reports, not in meetings. On the floor, talking to customers, watching how they moved through the space, noticing which products they picked up and put back, which displays stocked them, which checkout lanes backed up. He was running continuous behavioral research on his own store every day he was there. He also talked to his employees the same way he talked to customers, directly, informally, with what everyone who worked for him described as genuine interest. He knew the names of employees in stores across multiple states. He visited every store he could reach personally, flying himself in a small plane across Arkansas and the surrounding states, dropping in unannounced, walking the floor, talking to whoever was there. He called his employees associates. This was not, in 1962, common practice in retail. The word associate implied a partnership, a shared stake in the enterprise, rather than the employer-employee relationship that defined how most retailers treated their hourly workers. We'll come back to whether the word matched the reality. By 1969, 7 years after the Rogers opening, Walmart had 18 stores, all in Arkansas. That's not explosive growth by modern standards. Walton was expanding carefully, deliberately within the geographic range that his distribution infrastructure could support. He had learned from the Newport experience that building something and then losing control of it was worse than building slowly. He was also building the infrastructure that would eventually make the growth explosive. In 1970, Walmart opened its first dedicated distribution center, a large warehouse in Bentonville from which merchandise could be delivered to stores within a day's truck drive. This was not a revolutionary concept on its own. What made it revolutionary was the geographic strategy it enabled. Most retail chains in the 1960s and 1970s expanded along population corridors, following the highway infrastructure and the metro areas that generated foot traffic. Walmart's distribution center model meant something different. Every new store had to be within a day's drive of a distribution center. So Walmart expanded in concentric circles outward from Bentonville, filling in the rural market comprehensively before moving to the next ring. The result was a kind of rural market saturation that no competitor had attempted or could easily replicate. By the time a competitor noticed that Walmart was dominating retail in, say, rural Missouri, Walmart had already locked up every viable location in rural Missouri. The competitor would have to build a distribution center of their own to serve those markets, wait for existing lease terms to expire, and then compete on price against a company that had already spent a decade optimizing its supply chain for exactly those locations. The barrier to entry Walton built wasn't brand loyalty or technology. It was geography combined with logistics. He owned the locations before anyone else knew the locations mattered. In 1970, Walmart also went public on the New York Stock Exchange. The IPO raised capital that funded the next wave of distribution centers and store openings. It also created the mechanism by which Sam Walton became extraordinarily wealthy, not from taking money out of the business, but from the appreciation of shares he retained as the company's value grew. He kept living in Bentonville. He kept driving the pickup truck. He kept flying himself between stores in a small plane, eating at Waffle House, staying in Holiday Inns. The personal frugality was genuine, and also, at this point, practically unnecessary. The share appreciation was making him wealthy at a rate that his lifestyle spending couldn't dent. By 1972, Walmart had 51 stores and $78 million in annual sales. By 1975, 125 stores. By 1980, 276 stores and $1.2 billion in sales. The growth curve was bending upward in a way that was starting to look like something genuinely different from a successful regional retailer. Kmart, watching this from its Detroit headquarters, was not particularly worried. Walmart was still mostly in places Kmart didn't want to be: small towns, rural markets, the kind of locations where the land was cheap and the customer base was limited. This was, as it turned out, the most expensive misreading of a competitive threat in the history of American retail. The thing that made Walmart different from every other discount retailer wasn't the low prices. It was how the low prices were generated and sustained at scale. Because maintaining a price advantage across thousands of stores, millions of products, and billions of dollars of inventory requires a machinery that most of Walmart's competitors never built. Let's talk about how that machinery actually worked. The foundation was supplier negotiation, and Walmart's approach to supplier negotiation was, from a very early point, unlike anything the consumer goods industry had experienced before. The standard model in retail for most of the 20th century worked like this. A manufacturer would set a wholesale price for their product. Retailers would pay roughly that price, add their markup, and sell to consumers. The manufacturer held most of the pricing power. They set the floor, and retailers competed on service and selection rather than trying to undercut each other at the wholesale level. Walmart broke this model completely. The mechanism was volume. By the late 1970s, Walmart was placing orders large enough that a single Walmart contract represented a significant percentage of a mid-sized manufacturer's total annual revenue. A company that made, say, laundry detergent or dish soap or basic clothing might be selling 15% of its entire production to Walmart. Lose the Walmart contract, and you've lost 15% of your revenue overnight. That dependency gave Walmart enormous negotiating leverage, and Walton used it without hesitation. Walmart's buyers, the people responsible for negotiating with suppliers, operated under a simple mandate: get the lowest possible price. Not a good price, not a fair price, the lowest possible price. Every year, the expectation was that prices would go down, not stay flat. The efficiency gains you made in your factory, the improvements in your logistics, the economies of scale from growing your production. Walmart expected to capture most of those gains through lower wholesale prices. Suppliers who pushed back lost the contract. Suppliers who agreed to the terms and then couldn't maintain them at the quality level Walmart required also lost the contract. The selection process was continuous and brutal. There's a specific detail about Walmart's supplier negotiation that reveals how seriously the company took the power dynamic. For years, and this is documented by multiple former suppliers and by Walmart's own internal descriptions of its practices, Walmart's buyers met with suppliers in small, deliberately bare rooms at the Bentonville headquarters. No comfortable furniture, no hospitality. The supplier sat across a small table from the buyer, and the buyer made clear, explicitly and immediately, that the purpose of the meeting was to discuss how the supplier would lower its prices. The rooms were designed to communicate something. You are here on our terms. This is not a partnership. This is a price negotiation, and we will win it. Walton himself described the supplier relationship with a clarity that was almost admirable in its honesty. He said his job was to buy merchandise as cheaply as possible so he could sell it to his customers as cheaply as possible. The manufacturer's profit margin was not his concern. The manufacturer's employee wages were not his concern. The manufacturer's long-term viability was not his concern. This wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was a coherent philosophy. The customer was the only stakeholder that mattered, and everything else, supplier margins, employee wages, local economies, was a cost to be minimized in service of the customer's price. The second component of the price machine was the distribution system. By the mid-1980s, Walmart had built a network of massive regional distribution centers, each one roughly the size of 17 football fields, positioned so that every Walmart store was within a day's truck drive. Most retail chains in the 1960s and 1970s expanded along population corridors, following the highway infrastructure and the metro areas that generated foot traffic. Walmart's distribution center model meant something different. Every new store had to be within a day's drive of a distribution center. So Walmart expanded in concentric circles outward from Bentonville, filling in the rural market comprehensively before moving to the next ring. The result was a kind of rural market saturation that no competitor had attempted or could easily replicate. By the time a competitor noticed that Walmart was dominating retail in, say, rural Missouri, Walmart had already locked up every viable location in rural Missouri. The competitor would have to build a distribution center of their own to serve those markets, wait for existing lease terms to expire, and then compete on price against a company that had already spent a decade optimizing its supply chain for exactly those locations. The barrier to entry Walton built wasn't brand loyalty or technology. It was geography combined with logistics. He owned the locations before anyone else knew the locations mattered. In 1970, Walmart also went public on the New York Stock Exchange. The IPO raised capital that funded the next wave of distribution centers and store openings. It also created the mechanism by which Sam Walton became extraordinarily wealthy, not from taking money out of the business, but from the appreciation of shares he retained as the company's value grew. He kept living in Bentonville. He kept driving the pickup truck. He kept flying himself between stores in a small plane, eating at Waffle House, staying in Holiday Inns. The personal frugality was genuine, and also, at this point, practically unnecessary. The share appreciation was making him wealthy at a rate that his lifestyle spending couldn't dent. That meant Walmart could price 20% lower than Kmart on identical products and still generate the same profit per sale. Or it could price the same and generate 20% more profit per sale, or any combination in between. The choice Walmart made, consistently, persistently across every market it entered, was to pass most of that advantage to the customer through lower prices and use the resulting volume to widen the cost gap further. It was a flywheel. Lower prices brought more customers meant more volume meant more supplier leverage and more distribution efficiency. More leverage and efficiency meant lower costs. Lower costs enabled lower prices. Once that flywheel was spinning at full speed, it was essentially unstoppable by any competitor operating on conventional retail economics. And the community sitting between Walmart's parking lot and whatever used to be downtown, that community was about to find out what unstoppable actually meant. There is a specific study that retail economists cite so frequently it has become something of a landmark in the literature on Walmart's impact. It was conducted by economists Kenneth Stone of Iowa State University, published in 1988 and updated through the 1990s. Stone had access to detailed retail sales data for Iowa towns over the period when Walmart entered the state. What he found, systematically across hundreds of towns, was this. In the 10 years following a Walmart store opening in a given Iowa county, total retail sales in the surrounding small towns declined by an average of 25%. Some categories were hit much harder. Hardware stores saw average declines of over 50%. Variety stores, the five and dimes that had anchored small-town main streets for a century, were effectively eliminated. The towns didn't lose sales. The sales moved from the main street shops to the Walmart parking lot. The economic mechanism was simple and, from a strict market perspective, logical. Walmart was offering lower prices. Customers rationally preferred lower prices. Customers stopped shopping at the local hardware store and started shopping at Walmart. The local hardware store's revenue collapsed. The local hardware store closed. From the customer's individual perspective, each transaction was rational. Save $3 on a box of screws. Save $8 on a pair of jeans. The aggregate of those individually rational decisions was the systematic destruction of the local commercial ecosystem. Now, and this is where the analysis gets genuinely complicated, Walmart's defenders make a real point here. The customer's money is the customer's money. If a customer can buy the same product for less at Walmart, the additional dollars they save don't disappear. They get spent on something else, on a restaurant meal, on a school supply, on a home repair. The local economy doesn't necessarily shrink, it reallocates. This argument has merit. The problem is what it omits. The local hardware store wasn't just a place to buy screws. It was the hardware store owner's livelihood. It was 2 or 3 employees' jobs. The wages from those jobs were spent locally, at the diner, at the gas station, at the grocery store. When the hardware store closed, those wages disappeared from the local circulation, and the replacement jobs, at Walmart, were different in a specific, financially important way that we'll get to in Chapter 7. The hardware store owner had been a member of the local Chamber of Commerce, a donor to local charities, a sponsor of the Little League team. The Walmart store manager was an employee of a corporation headquartered in Bentonville, Arkansas, whose profits flowed to Bentonville, Arkansas, not to the local community. This is the extractive quality of the Walmart model that the customers save money argument misses. Yes, customers paid less, but the money they saved was recaptured by Walmart's margin, which left the community entirely. The local business model, imperfect, sometimes inefficient, sometimes more expensive, at least circulated money within the local economy before it left. Walmart extracted it immediately and completely. The human dimension of this is not captured in the economic studies. There is a town in Iowa, Estherville, population around 6,000, that is representative of hundreds of similar cases. Before Walmart came to the region in the late 1980s, downtown Estherville had a functioning commercial core: hardware store, clothing shops, a pharmacy, a variety store, a diner, a shoe store. The downtown was where people went on Saturdays. It was a social space as much as a commercial one. By the mid-19s, most of those businesses were gone. The buildings stood empty. The downtown, physically intact, was commercially hollow. The Walmart was doing fine. It was doing all the business that had previously been distributed across those shops. Local residents interviewed in subsequent years said conflicting things. Yes, prices were lower at Walmart. Yes, the selection was better. And also, something was gone that wasn't coming back. The social function of the downtown, the place where you ran into people you knew, where the shopkeeper asked about your kid, where commerce and community were intertwined, that was gone. You can't quantify that loss in a regression analysis. It shows up in other ways, in studies showing higher rates of social isolation in communities that have lost their commercial centers, in studies showing reduced civic participation, lower voter turnout, declining membership in local organizations, in communities with high Walmart penetration, in the demographic studies showing accelerating population decline in small towns that lost their economic bases. Walton was aware of the criticism. He addressed it in his autobiography with a combination of genuine engagement and fundamental dismissal. His argument was that the local businesses that closed in Walmart's wake had been overcharging customers for decades, that the community being mourned was in part a community built on consumers paying more than they needed to for basic goods, and that this was not something worth preserving at the customer's expense. There's truth in this. Some local retailers were inefficient. Some were expensive because there was no competitive pressure, and customers had no alternative. The sentimentality about Main Street America sometimes overlooks the fact that Main Street America was not always cheap or particularly well served. But Walton's argument also conveniently stops before the part where the replacement, the Walmart store, the Walmart wages, the Walmart corporate structure, is assessed against the same standards. Because if the question is whether customers are well served by the post-Walmart small-town economy, the answer is more complicated than the prices alone suggest. Walmart itself became, in many rural communities, the only retail option. The local businesses had closed. The competitors who might have filled the gap never opened, because the Walmart made the economics unworkable. The choice customers had made, rationally, individually, correctly in each transaction, had collectively produced a situation where they now had one option, and one option, regardless of the prices it charges, is a monopoly. In 1985, Sam Walton made a public pledge that was genuinely unusual for an American retailer. He announced a Buy American campaign, a Walmart commitment to preferentially source products from American manufacturers. There would be signage in stores. Vendors would be vetted for American production. The company would pay a modest premium for American-made goods, rather than automatically taking the cheapest available option. The campaign was real, in the sense that it happened and generated significant press coverage and goodwill. Walton believed, at some level in American manufacturing, He was of a generation and a geography where buying American was both economic sense and patriotic identity. The campaign was also, in a structural sense, temporary, because the same forces that made Walmart's prices lower than competitors in the retail market were operating in the manufacturing market, and those forces pointed toward one direction: China. Here's the economic reality of American manufacturing in the mid-1980s. An American factory producing basic consumer goods, clothing, housewares, basic electronics, toys, was operating with labor costs roughly 10 to 15 times higher than a Chinese factory producing the same goods. The American factory had environmental regulations, safety regulations, minimum wage requirements. The Chinese factory, in the early years of China's economic opening, had almost none of those costs. For a retailer whose entire business model was built on being cheaper than everyone else, this was not a theoretical problem. It was an existential one. If Walmart paid the premium for American-made goods while competitors sourced from China, competitors would eventually be cheaper than Walmart. And cheaper than Walmart was not a position Sam Walton was willing to occupy. The Buy American campaign lasted roughly 5 years at meaningful scale. By the early 1990s, and significantly after Walton's death in 1992, Walmart's sourcing had shifted decisively toward China and other low-cost manufacturing countries. The numbers that followed are staggering. By 2004, Walmart was importing approximately $18 billion worth of goods from China annually. That single figure represented roughly 10% of all U.S. imports from China that year. Walmart, by itself, was one of China's largest trading partners, not just one of America's largest importers, but one of China's most significant export customers. The Economic Policy Institute, a labor-focused think tank, published a study in 2004 estimating that Walmart's China sourcing had displaced approximately 196,000 American manufacturing jobs between 2001 and 2006. Other economists disputed the methodology and the number, but no serious analyst disputed the direction. Walmart's purchasing decisions were a significant driver of the shift in American manufacturing toward offshore production. The mechanism was the same supplier leverage that had driven domestic supplier prices down. Once Walmart's buyers started seriously engaging Chinese manufacturers, the price differential they could present to American suppliers was devastating. Here is the identical product made in Guangdong province at a landed cost in the US of $X. Your cost is 1.5 times X. You have 6 months to match the price, or we move the business. Some American manufacturers invested in automation and managed to stay competitive. Many couldn't. The factories closed. The jobs went to Guangdong province, to Zhejiang, to the manufacturing cities along China's eastern coast. The Chinese manufacturers who won Walmart business were subject to the same price pressure that American manufacturers had been subject to. Walmart's buyers didn't stop squeezing when they moved production offshore. They squeezed Chinese factories with the same relentlessness they had applied to American ones. The difference was that the floor, the minimum viable operating cost for a Chinese factory, was so much lower than for an American one that the prices Walmart extracted, while still keeping those factories viable, was simply unbeatable by any American manufacturer. There's a supply chain detail here that illustrates the operational scale. Walmart's global sourcing office in Shenzhen, China, opened in 2002, employed hundreds of people whose job was to identify, qualify, and negotiate with Chinese manufacturers. The office processed thousands of supplier relationships. It was, in effect, a purchasing machine of industrial scale, permanently dedicated to finding lower prices in the Chinese manufacturing economy. The consequences of this sourcing shift fell on communities that have a complicated relationship with Walmart's retail presence. Carolina's textile towns that had supplied American retailers with basic clothing for generations lost their factories to Chinese competition, in part accelerated by Walmart's purchasing decisions. Furniture manufacturing towns in North Carolina and Virginia saw plants close. Consumer electronics assembly that had existed in the American Midwest moved to Chinese contract manufacturers who were supplying Walmart at prices domestic producers couldn't approach. And here's the specific cruelty of the geography. Many of the towns most severely affected by Walmart's Chinese sourcing decisions were the same category of small rural American towns that Walmart's retail stores were simultaneously serving. The factory jobs that had provided the income base for rural communities were going to China. while the Walmart store in the same community was providing low-price retail options to the increasingly lower-income population left behind. The customer saving money at Walmart was sometimes the same person whose factory job had been eliminated by Walmart's sourcing decisions. The lower prices were partly funded by the elimination of the wage that had previously let that customer buy at higher prices. This is not a small irony. It is a structural feature of what Walmart built, a system that, at sufficient scale, contained its own demand management. By driving down manufacturing wages through sourcing pressure, Walmart contributed to the income compression that made its own low-price model more necessary for the customers it served. Walton didn't design this. The consequences at full scale weren't visible in 1962 or even in 1985 when he made the Buy American pledge. But the logic was there from the beginning, in the supplier negotiation philosophy, in the margin compression doctrine, in the absolute priority of the customer's price over everything else in the supply chain. The Buy American campaign was real and, in retrospect, represents the last moment when Walmart's leadership genuinely wrestled with the trade-off between its pricing model and its impact on American manufacturing. After Walton, the wrestling stopped. Let's talk about the people who actually worked at Walmart, not the executives, not Sam Walton, the hourly associates, the cashiers, the stockers, the greeters, the people who spent 8-hour shifts on their feet at registers processing several hundred transactions each, or moving hundreds of cases of merchandise from the back room to the sales floor. By 2004, Walmart employed 1.4 million people in the United States. That made it the largest private employer in America, larger than any manufacturer, any government contractor, any service company. 1 out of every 100 American workers worked for Walmart. The average hourly wage for a Walmart associate in 2004 was approximately $9.68 per hour. At full-time hours, 40 hours per week, that's roughly $20,000 per year. The federal poverty line for a family of 4 in 2004 was $19,157. So a full-time Walmart associate with a family of 4 was earning just above the poverty line before taxes. The problem was that Walmart did not reliably offer full-time hours. The company's scheduling system, optimized like everything else at Walmart, for cost efficiency, assigned hours based on store traffic patterns. Associates were often scheduled for 30 or 32 hours per week rather than 40, which kept them below the threshold for full-time benefits eligibility. The result was a workforce in which a significant percentage of employees were earning poverty-level wages, despite working for the most profitable retailer in the history of American commerce. This is where the associate language gets complicated. Walton had introduced the term in the early days to signal partnership and shared stake. The reality of the associate relationship by the 2000s was hourly wages at or near the poverty line, benefits structured to minimize company cost, scheduling optimized for the company's labor cost rather than the employee's need for predictable income, and a comprehensive and aggressive system for preventing any collective bargaining that might change any of those terms. Because Walmart did not have unions, and keeping it that way was, for most of the company's history, a primary operational priority. The anti-union operation at Walmart was not subtle. The company maintained a hotline, later confirmed in internal documents, through which store managers could report early signs of union organizing activity. The response was rapid. A team from Bentonville, sometimes including labor relations specialists, would arrive at the store within days to address the situation through a combination of manager meetings, associate meetings, and what the company called education about the risks of union representation. The education materials presented unions as primarily vehicles for extracting dues from workers while providing minimal benefit and risking store closures. Workers considering unionization were reminded in these materials that Walmart could, and had, closed stores rather than operate under union contracts. That last point was not a bluff. In 2005, Walmart closed a store in Jonquière, Quebec, 6 months after the workers there became the first Walmart employees in North America to successfully negotiate a union contract. The company said the closure was for business reasons. The Canadian Labour Board found that the closure was, in fact, a response to the unionization and constituted an illegal labor practice. The store stayed closed. The message was clear: unionize and the store closes. No store means no jobs. The threat didn't need to be repeated often because it didn't need to be. Everyone in every Walmart in North America understood what Jonquière meant. The wages and the anti-union operations intersected in a specific way that generated significant public controversy in the early 2000s. Walmart associates enrolling in public assistance programs. A 2004 study conducted for the Democratic staff of the House Education and Workforce Committee estimated that a single Walmart store of 200 employees cost federal taxpayers approximately $420,000 per year in public assistance. Medicaid, food stamps, subsidized housing, and other programs used by Walmart employees whose wages and benefits were insufficient to cover basic living costs. Walmart's position was that it paid competitive wages for the retail industry, which was true, and that the benefits and assistance programs its employees used were available to all Americans and were not Walmart's responsibility. The company was not obligated to pay wages above market rate. This argument is legally correct. It is also a description of a system in which the public subsidy of Walmart's labor costs was enabling the price advantage that was eliminating higher-paying retail and manufacturing jobs elsewhere in the economy. The taxpayer was, in effect, subsidizing the price of goods at Walmart. Walton himself was not alive for most of this controversy. He died in 1992, before the company reached the scale at which these issues became fully visible. But the wage philosophy was his. The anti-union operations were built on foundations he laid. The associate language was his, and the gap between the language and the reality was already visible in his lifetime. He once said in an interview that he believed the best thing he could do for his associates was keep the company growing, because growth meant jobs. That the way to help workers was to build a bigger company, not to share more of the existing profit. This is a coherent position. It is also a position that, at the scale Walmart reached, produced the largest concentration of poverty wage employment in the American economy, while generating one of the largest concentrations of private wealth. Both things came from the same philosophy, the same man. The same pickups and the same waffle houses and the same frugality that he applied to himself and to his workers and to his suppliers with equal consistency. Here is a number that requires a moment to sit with. The Walton family, the heirs of Sam Walton, specifically his daughter Alice, and his sons S. Robson, Rob, and Jim, have a combined net worth that, as of the mid-2020s, exceeds $200 billion. $200 billion. The Federal Reserve publishes data on American wealth distribution. In the years when this figure has been calculated, the Walton family's combined wealth has exceeded the total wealth of the bottom 40 to 42% of American households. That's not the bottom 40% of individual earners. It's the bottom 40% of households, approximately 15 million households. The combined net worth of 50 million American households is roughly equal to what 3 people inherited from a man who drove a pickup truck and ate at Waffle House. This is not because the Waltons have been particularly aggressive investors or business builders since Sam's death. They have, by most accounts, been competent stewards of the Walmart stake rather than transformative operators. The wealth has grown primarily because Walmart has grown, and Walmart's growth has compounded their existing share position at the rate of a very large, very successful public company. Sam Walton's wealth, during his lifetime, was also primarily held in Walmart stock. He retained a large percentage of shares through the company's growth, and the share appreciation was the engine of his wealth accumulation. His personal spending habits, genuinely frugal by all accounts, meant that he was not extracting large amounts of cash from the company. He was accumulating equity. The estate planning that preserved the Walton family's position through Sam's death and into subsequent generations was sophisticated and, entirely legally, structured to minimize estate taxes. The mechanisms used, trusts, charitable entities, family limited partnerships, are available to any American family with sufficient assets and sufficient legal advice to use them. The Waltons used them expertly. Alice Walton, Sam's daughter, has used a portion of her wealth to build the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Bentonville, Arkansas, a genuinely significant cultural institution that has attracted major works and major attention to a town that was not previously on the art world's map. The collection has been assessed at over $1 billion. The museum is free to the public. Jim Walton runs Harvest Bank, a regional banking operation with significant presence across Arkansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, and Kansas. Rob Walton spent decades on Walmart's board, most of that time as chairman. The Walton family's philanthropy, primarily channeled through the Walton Family Foundation, focuses on education reform, specifically charter schools and school choice, and environmental conservation. The education work is significant in scale and controversial in direction, with critics arguing that the Foundation's school choice advocacy undermines public school systems in ways that disproportionately affect low-income communities. The irony that a foundation funded by a company that has paid poverty wages to millions of retail workers is now directing significant resources toward educational opportunities for the children of those workers is not lost on critics. The response from foundation representatives is that the philanthropic work stands on its own merits regardless of the source of the funding, an argument that echoes in its structure Sam Walton's argument that his job was to serve customers and not to worry about the rest of the supply chain. There's a specific moment in the wealth accumulation story worth noting. In 1970, when Walmart went public, Sam Walton retained approximately 39% of the company's shares. The IPO price was $16.50 per share. By 1972, adjusted for splits, those shares were already worth multiples of their IPO price. An investor who bought $1,000 worth of Walmart stock at the IPO and held it through 2002 would have shares worth approximately $12 million. The mathematics of that compound growth, applied to a 39% position, produced the foundation of the Walton family wealth. The workers stocking the shelves in 1970 did not have equity positions. The associates who built the company's operational infrastructure had wages, not shares. The suppliers who were squeezed to lower prices did not participate in the share appreciation that lower prices enabled. The wealth created by Walmart's growth was not distributed proportionally to the people who created it. It was captured primarily by the people who owned the equity, which means primarily by Sam Walton and his family. This is how American capitalism works, and the Walton case is not unique in its structure. It is, however, unusually visible in its scale. The gap between what the company's workers earned and what the company's owners accumulated is, in the Walmart case, one of the largest such gaps in American business history. Sam Walton drove the pickup truck and ate at the Waffle House and stayed in the Holiday Inn. He was genuinely frugal. He also accumulated wealth at a rate that his lifestyle made invisible until the Forbes list made it visible. The frugality was real and also at some level a performance, a way of presenting himself as a man of the people who happened to be the richest man in America. He was a man of the people in his tastes. He was not a man of the people in his economics. For 30 years, from the early 1960s to the early 1990s, Walmart was the most disruptive force in American retail. It disrupted local retailers, regional chains, national discount chains. It disrupted manufacturing supply chains. It disrupted labor markets. It disrupted community economics. The disruption was always in one direction, toward Walmart. And then something happened that Walmart's leadership didn't see coming with anywhere near the clarity they should have. In 1994, Jeff Bezos incorporated Amazon in his garage in Bellevue, Washington. The initial business was online book sales. It was a niche, a clever niche, books being the right product to test online retail with, but a niche nonetheless. Walmart's leadership, if they thought about Amazon at all in the mid-1990s, thought about it the way Kmart had thought about Walmart in the mid-1970s, a small regional player in a market we don't really compete in. This was, as it turned out, the most expensive misreading of a competitive threat since Kmart had failed to take Walmart seriously. Amazon's strategic logic was Walton's logic, rebuilt for the internet age. Start with a product category that works well for the format, books for Amazon, just as rural small towns had worked well for Walmart's first stores. Obsess over the customer experience and price. Build logistics infrastructure that competitors can't easily replicate. Use the resulting scale to expand into adjacent categories. By 2002, Amazon had moved beyond books into electronics, toys, tools, and household goods, the core categories of a Walmart store. By 2005, Amazon Prime had launched, with free 2-day shipping on millions of items, a logistics value proposition that competed directly with Walmart's in-store convenience advantage. The price comparison was devastating for Walmart in specific categories. A customer comparing prices on electronics or household goods found that Amazon was frequently competitive with or cheaper than Walmart. without requiring a 30-minute drive to a store and a parking lot navigation. Walmart's response was late, and for most of the 2000s, inadequate. The company launched a website in the late 1990s, spun it off as a separate entity, brought it back in-house, and spent a decade struggling to build an e-commerce operation that could compete with a company that had been born as an e-commerce operation. The fundamental problem was cultural. Walmart's entire operational genius was physical. The distribution centers, the store locations, the supply chain management, the floor-level associate operations. The company's DNA was in the parking lot and the shelving and the checkout lane. E-commerce required different infrastructure, different systems, different organizational capabilities, and a willingness to cannibalize the physical store business in ways that Walmart's leadership found genuinely difficult. In 2016, Walmart made its most significant e-commerce move. It acquired Jet.com, a startup e-commerce competitor, for $3.3 billion and brought Jet's founder Mark Law in to run the combined Walmart e-commerce operation. The acquisition was an acknowledgement that Walmart could not build what it needed from scratch and had to buy it. Law's tenure produced real improvement in Walmart's e-commerce capabilities. The company built fulfillment infrastructure, expanded its online selection, and launched curbside pickup, a format that combined the logistics of e-commerce with the physical store infrastructure Walmart already had. By 2030, Walmart's e-commerce business was generating over $50 billion in annual sales globally, significant, but still a fraction of Amazon's e-commerce revenue. The more important development was that Walmart had, for the first time in its history, a serious competitor that was applying Walmart's own strategic logic against it. Amazon was starting from the customer and working backwards to price, just as Walton had. Amazon was building logistics infrastructure that created structural cost advantages, just as Walton had. Amazon was expanding from a base in a market others didn't care about, internet retail in the 1990s, into the core market, just as Walton had expanded from rural Arkansas into the national discount retail market. Walton had done to Main Street what Amazon was threatening to do to Walmart. Whether Walmart survives as a dominant retail force through the Amazon era is genuinely uncertain. The company has structural advantages: its physical store network, its grocery operations, its Sam's Club warehouse business, that Amazon hasn't replicated. It has also demonstrated, in the last decade, an ability to adapt that it hadn't shown during the Kmart and Sears collapse era, but it is, for the first time in its history, in the position of a defender rather than an attacker. It is the established incumbent being disrupted by someone with a lower cost structure and a better customer experience in key categories. It is, in other words, in the position that Kmart was in 1975 when it looked at Walmart and decided not to worry.